So today I'm going to talk a little bit about John Salas. This is his stone here in this beautiful little spot in Campbell County, Tennessee. His stone has only one date, April 1st, 1919. The stone only having one date, that's what initially drew my attention to it. I wanted to know more about John Salas when I saw his stone. So I did some research, and I found a very tragic, interesting story about John Salas and his life here in La Follette, Tennessee. So John was born in Greece around 1864. He was married, but he didn't have any children. He came to La Follette, Tennessee and opened up a Greek restaurant, and he left his wife residing in Greece. La Follette was a very busy town at this time. There was a blast furnace that employed about 1,500 people. I mean, there was a large population in La Follette. It was the place to be. So I can imagine John was doing really well financially with his business and his restaurant downtown in the middle of it. I'm still not clear if John actually lived in La Follette or if he lived in Knoxville and commuted, because I found articles stating he lived in La Follette and also found some stating he lived in Knoxville. I didn't really follow up on that research, so I'm not really sure if he lived here or not. But he did, John had a couple of close friends that lived in Knoxville who were also from Greece. And he did befriend a fellow in La Follette by the name of Charlie Paul. Charlie was 21 years old. He was married to Betsy, and he had no children. He worked in the coal mines. It was said that John and Charlie were known to take walks together at night. And during this time frame in La Follette, local residents that lived near the train tracks, they would walk up and down the tracks every so often and collect chunks of coal that had fallen from the train. They would collect it and store it for their own use. It was free coal for them, so, hey, why not? They're just gonna walk up and down the tracks and collect what they can get. But on the morning of April 1st, 1919, one of the local residents came across a horrible scene. While he was collecting his coal alongside the tracks, he found the body of John Salas. I'm not going to go into all the details because the newspapers back then, they would publish all the details, and they were brutal. I'm not going to go into all the details of how John was discovered, but he was found about 50 feet away from the tracks. Automatically, when they realized it was John, the first person that came to mind as a suspect was Charlie, because John and Charlie were often seen out walking at night together. So, with a search of Charlie's home, they found more than enough evidence to know without a doubt Charlie was responsible for this. They found his clothing, other pieces of evidence that Charlie couldn't deny that he was the responsible one. So they go and get Charlie. He's actually at work in the coal mines that day, and they go get him from the coal mines and arrest him. The circumstances behind John's death angered a lot of people. I mean, it was horrific. It was just a horrific murder, and people were mad. The newspaper article said that Charlie had robbed John of $200. Charlie was tried in the court at Jacksboro and found guilty. He was sentenced to die by electrocution. So, you would think that that's where the story would end, but that's not the case here. So, they transported Charlie to Knoxville to hold him until his electrocution date. And while he's being held in Knoxville, the mob of people angered about the whole ordeal, it just grew and grew, and finally the mob stormed the jail at Knoxville where he was being held. Now, during all this commotion, Charlie escaped. He escaped, and one witness says that they saw Charlie that next morning in La Follette, and nobody's seen or heard from Charlie since. Now, keep in mind, this was in 1919, and Charlie was 21 then. You remember he had a wife. Her name was Bessie, and Bessie moved back in with her mom and dad. I could only imagine. Gosh, can you imagine what she went through? Finding out her husband did this horrible thing, and then him just disappearing, not knowing if the mob had murdered him or if he was just on the run. I mean, she didn't know what happened to Charlie. I'm not sure if she wanted to know. I can't imagine what her feelings were about all the things that happened, but she moved back in with her mom and dad, and several years later, I think it was in 1940, I found that she was actually listed as divorced and going by her maiden name again, and she lived with her sister. But Bessie never remarried. She never had any children, and she's buried in Knoxville. She lived her life in Knoxville with her family. But it really makes you wonder, like, did Charlie just befriend John just to plan this? Just to rob him? Were they actually friends? Did something happen between them? Did they get into an argument? Or did he just cold-bloodedly kill John for the earnings from his restaurant? There's so many questions. I've searched and researched. I've went through newspaper articles. I've researched everything. Charlie, if Charlie lived after that, he changed his name and lived a completely different life. I can't find any trace of Charlie after 1919. It's crazy. And as for John Salas, his two friends that I mentioned earlier, he had the two friends that lived in Knoxville. They were both of them had came from Greece as well. And they came to La Follette after John's death. They came to La Follette to take care of his burial. I'm guessing that they're the ones that picked this beautiful spot of land for his gravesite, and that they're the ones that picked the headstone. They both worked and lived in Knoxville. Their names were well, I'm not even going to try to pronounce these names because it'll end horribly if I try to pronounce their names. But they lived in Knoxville. So that's the story of John Salas, and it's a horrible one. I mean, I just saw the single date on the headstone, and it led me into this whole big story. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about John Salas. This is his stone here in this beautiful little spot in Campbell County, Tennessee. His stone has only one date, April 1st, 1919. The stone only having one date, that's what initially drew my attention to it. I wanted to know more about John Salas when I saw his stone. So I did some research, and I found a very